It starts with a question most men are too afraid to ask. What if everything you believe about love, desire, and the nature of women has been a lie? Carefully constructed, socially reinforced, and deeply comforting. But when you scratch beneath that surface, you find something ancient, something volatile. You find truth. Not the polite truth you read in textbooks or hear in therapy sessions. The kind that coils in the dark corners of your mind when you're alone, wondering why she left, why she stayed, or why she drives you mad even when you know she's no good for you. Picture her. Not just any woman, but the woman. The one who ignited something inside you didn't know existed. Maybe she hurt you. Maybe she made you feel like a god and then ripped the heavens from under your feet. Now picture Freud, not the caricature of a bearded old man with a fixation on sex, but the real Freud. The one who dared to ask why civilization trembles in the face of female desire. Imagine him sitting across from you, calm but intense, his words sinking into your chest like ice. And he tells you, you don't understand women. You understand their surface, but not the undercurrent, not the force that drives them. Freud was obsessed, not because he didn't respect women, but because he realized they held the key to the darkest mysteries of the human mind. Female sexuality wasn't a puzzle to solve. It was a riddle that kept devouring those who thought they had the answer. And once he started pulling the thread, the entire tapestry of polite society began to unravel. What he found wasn't just psychological, it was civilizational. A force so raw, so potent, it made empires rise and fall. It made kings kneel and wise men weep. And yet, it was a force everyone pretended didn't exist. In Freud's world, women weren't victims. They were architects, not of cities or systems, but of obsession, of madness, of surrender. His patients, like Anna O., weren't just sick. They were symbols. Bertha Pappenheim was her real name, a woman who lost control of her body because her desire had no voice. The moment she spoke her hidden truths, her paralysis vanished. It was as if her body had been screaming the words her mouth wasn't allowed to say. That was Freud's breakthrough. Hysteria wasn't about weakness. It was about power that had nowhere to go. But he didn't stop there. He went deeper. He found a terrifying symmetry between repression and desire. In a world that told women to be angels, their minds rebelled like devils. They turned inward. And what grew there wasn't pretty. It was raw, primal, ancient. The desire for a father figure, the envy of a phallus, the need to destroy the very thing they craved. The Electra complex wasn't fantasy. It was a mirror. One most people couldn't bear to look into. Take Dora, just 18. On the surface, a girl suffering from emotional outbursts. But Freud saw something darker. A longing so conflicted, she couldn't even admit it to herself. She fled from treatment, and history says she rejected Freud. But maybe she didn't reject him. Maybe she was running from a truth too sharp to hold. And here's where it gets truly dangerous. Freud didn't just study passion. He studied destruction, the death drive, thanatos, the instinct to unravel oneself. And he found it in women more often than anyone dared to admit. A beautiful woman who jumped in front of a carriage days before her wedding. Not because she wanted to die, but because she couldn't bear to live a life that looked perfect on paper. Freud wasn't shocked. He expected it, because to him, happiness wasn't safety. It was terror. And destruction? That was relief. Some women, he believed, were drawn to chaos like moths to flame, not out of malice, out of instinct. Think of the ones who leave stability for drama, the ones who break things just to feel the thrill of fixing them, the ones who say, "I love you," and then disappear. Freud said that wasn't madness, that was design. History backs him up. Look past the stories and you'll see the pattern. Women whose names are whispered in fear or awe, not for what they built, but for what they brought down. Lucrezia Borgia, Elizabeth Bathory. Women who merged seduction with violence. They weren't just anomalies. They were expressions of the death drive Freud tried to decode. But the real warning wasn't about queens or killers. It was about everyday women. The kind you meet, date, marry. The kind who turn love into a battlefield and leave you wondering what went wrong. Freud believed some women eroticize suffering, not because they enjoy pain, but because it makes love feel real. A woman who was abused may chase abusers, not because she's broken, but because pain is familiar. Safe. Freud called it repetition compulsion, the urge to relive trauma until it finally obeys. It's why some women run from nice guys, not because nice is boring, because nice feels like a lie, and chaos feels like truth. But what if this instinct isn't just psychological? What if it's civilizational? What if the suppressed desires of women have shaped the course of human history more than any army or law? Freud hinted at this, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Wars started over a glance, revolutions over a rumor. Helen of Troy wasn't kidnapped, she was desired. And in that desire, she wielded more power than 1,000 swords. Freud's theory of hysterical historicity suggested that women, especially when repressed, don't just influence men. They reroute the flow of history. Claudia of Rome, Marie Antoinette, women whose sexuality became symbols, whose reputations were weaponized, not because they did something wrong, but because they represented a force too dangerous to leave unchecked. Their bodies became battlegrounds, their names, catalysts. And even as modernity emerged, the repression didn't disappear. It evolved. Victorian women suffering from nervous disorders were expressing more than neurosis. They were screaming from the inside out. Society labeled them as fragile. Freud saw them as overloaded, not by weakness, but by power denied, by pleasure unspoken. Their illnesses weren't diseases, they were encrypted desires. And today, the world pretends it's moved on, but the patterns remain. Women who seek destruction in the guise of romance, who mask their longing in blame, who sabotage their happiness the moment it feels too real. It's not a flaw, it's a force. Freud saw it, he named it, and he warned men not to fight it, but to understand it, because in that understanding is the only hope of survival. Now imagine a man standing at the edge of this chaos, trying to love a woman who doesn't even understand herself. He thinks if he's kind enough, patient enough, strong enough, he can save her from her pain. But Freud would say, that's not love, it's delusion. Because you can't rescue someone from a storm they don't want to leave, especially when the storm gives them a sense of control, of identity, of power. This is the cruel irony. The woman who cries for safety might flee the moment she finds it, not because she's a liar, but because her unconscious still believes that love means pain, that peace means emptiness. Freud saw this not as a female flaw, but as a universal truth twisted by repression. He believed the root of female suffering wasn't just trauma, it was denial. Denial of desire, denial of power, denial of the self. And when that denial builds up, it erupts, not always in violence, but in sabotage, manipulation, confusion. A woman turns against her partner, not because she hates him, but because she's terrified he might be real, that the intimacy she craves might actually exist, and worse, that it might expose her, not her body, but her soul, the part of her that's still afraid to be seen. This is where the death drive becomes personal. It's not just about history or therapy sessions. It's about the woman in your bed who looks at you with love one minute and contempt the next. It's about the argument that explodes over nothing, the push and pull, the game of emotional chicken where neither side wants to crash, but both are too scared to stop. Freud didn't say all women are like this. He said all humans carry this potential, but in women, it expresses itself in ways men often misread. Take the woman who tests boundaries, not to be cruel, but to see if you'll hold firm. Who says she doesn't care, then punishes you for not chasing her? Who tells you what she wants, then rejects you when you give it? These aren't contradictions, they're confessions. Freud would say her unconscious is at war with itself. Part of her wants to be loved. The other part is convinced that love is a trap. So she builds the cage herself, then dares you to enter it. And yet, this chaos is intoxicating. That's the trap for men, the allure of the broken woman, the mysterious one, the femme fatale who lures you in with vulnerability and burns you with it. You tell yourself she needs you. You believe you're different. You'll fix her. But the more you try, the more you lose yourself. Freud warned about this. He said the men who suffer most aren't the cruel ones. They're the saviors. The ones who give too much, feel too deeply, and end up broken by a woman who doesn't know what to do with all that love. So what's the way out? Not withdrawal, not resentment, not cold detachment that turns you into a ghost. Freud believed the answer wasn't to run from female chaos, but to meet it with clarity, to become the man who sees without illusion, who listens without reacting, who loves without losing himself. That's the real power. Not control, but calm. Not conquest, but presence. And it begins with recognizing that female sexuality, when repressed, becomes mythic. Not just in legend, but in everyday life. The girl who needs drama to feel alive. The woman who creates enemies to feel righteous. The partner who punishes love because it feels too close to need. These aren't manipulations. They're symptoms. Signals of a deeper fracture. Freud spent his life tracing back to the source. He believed the Madonna whore complex wasn't just a male fantasy. It was a female war. The inner divide between purity and desire. A woman raised to be virtuous, but wired to crave intensity. Freud didn't invent this split. He observed it. Women who could only express desire through degradation. Who wept after sex, not out of regret, but shame. Who punished men for giving them what they begged for. One of his patients would pray after every orgasm, convinced she had sinned. Another fantasized about being bought just to justify her own pleasure. And this wasn't just pathology. It was a mirror. A reflection of a world that taught women to fear their own bodies, to see lust as filth and obedience as virtue. Freud said that when desire is denied, it doesn't disappear. It mutates. It hides in dreams, in symptoms, in choices that look irrational from the outside, but make perfect sense to the unconscious mind. A woman dates a man she despises because he reminds her of the father who ignored her. She sabotages love because her first crush betrayed her. She tests loyalty because every role model abandoned her. The unconscious doesn't care about fairness. It cares about patterns, about replaying the past until it gets a different ending. And most tragically, it never does. That's why some women repeat the same relationship over and over, changing the face, but not the dynamic. Freud didn't see this as hopeless. He saw it as a call to courage. The courage to look inward, to confront the roots of pain, and to choose a new path, not because it's easy, but because it's the only path to freedom. But most never make that journey, because the darkness is too seductive, the chaos too familiar, and the drama too rewarding. That's the secret Freud uncovered but rarely published, that for some women, the storm isn't a curse, it's home. And any man who enters it thinking he can bring peace will only drown. Yet Freud didn't stop at diagnosis. He searched for answers, not just for women, but for the men caught in their orbit. He saw that men too were complicit. That many were addicted to saving women because it gave them purpose, because it distracted them from their own void. The rescuer complex, he called it. The fantasy that if you heal her, you heal yourself. But you don't. You only deepen the wound. Real strength, Freud said, comes from standing in the fire and not flinching, from seeing the chaos and not absorbing it, from loving without fixing, observing without judging. That's the man who survives, the man who thrives, the man who builds not around a woman, but beside her, only if she's willing to build too. And here's where Freud took his boldest step. He believed the world would only change when women understood their own shadows, when they stopped blaming and started exploring, when they faced the parts of themselves they were taught to bury, the jealousy, the rage, the craving for control, the hunger to be dominated, and the terror of being powerless. All of it. Without shame, without masks, because only then could love be real. Only then could men and women meet without illusion, without projection, without war.